Dolly's story hits the screen with a stark, jarring reality. She is only 25 years old, yet her body carries the devastating wear and tear of a 70-year-old. Right from the jump, it's glaringly obvious that this won't be one of those clean, highly motivating weight loss transformations where a single wake-up call changes everything overnight. Instead, Dolly arrives completely miserable, trapped in chronic pain, hooked up to an oxygen tank, and utterly dependent on others for basic morning tasks. Honestly, when you are in your mid-20s and your daily routine requires a literal emergency response team just to function, you know a profound crisis has taken hold. She openly confesses that food is the only force powerful enough to numb her darkest impulses, a chilling admission that diagnoses her entire struggle before the episode even unfolds. For Dolly, eating isn't about sustenance. It's a shield, a distraction, an emotional crutch, and the sole reliable presence in a world where people constantly fail her. The tragic irony is that the exact substance providing a fleeting 5 minutes of comfort is systematically stripping away her future day by day. That is the predatory trap of severe food addiction. It cradles you affectionately, while slowly destroying you from the inside out. Her closest friend, Cheyenne, steps in to offer hands-on support, driven by a deep empathy born from her own struggles as a plus-sized woman. They share an immediate, painful bond rooted in a mutual understanding of public judgment, cruel stares, and the exhausting reality of being reduced entirely to your physical size. Yet, watching Cheyenne help Dolly bathe and meticulously clean around the massive lymphedema beneath her stomach is incredibly difficult to witness. Dolly isn't just dealing with mild discomfort. She is in agony, forcing herself to lift her own skin, enduring sharp physical pain, and relying on someone else for basic hygiene shifts the viewer's perspective from this is deeply tragic to this is an absolute medical emergency. Enter her mother, Stacy, a figure who immediately complicates the narrative because she isn't some cold-hearted enabler ignoring her daughter's demise. Stacy genuinely loves Dolly, but she is also profoundly exhausted, carrying a crushing weight of responsibility that no single parent should bear alone. Unfortunately, the household is deeply entrenched in behavioral loops that allowed this crisis to flourish. Dolly recalls a childhood defined by severe loneliness, where food was always left as a substitute for presence, becoming her go-to escape whenever she felt lonely, rejected, or angry. Once food assumes the roles of babysitter, therapist, and best friend during your formative years, it doesn't just vanish when you turn 18. Dolly's early years were already incredibly chaotic. Her father was a volatile, inconsistent figure in her life, constantly battling severe drug addiction and incarceration, yet she loved him desperately despite his inability to provide stability. That kind of broken dynamic severely damages a child's psychological development, forcing them to constantly beg for crumbs of affection from someone who only appears in pieces. On top of that parental neglect, she endured merciless school bullying, was ostracized as the fat, awkward kid, and was diagnosed with a cocktail of mental health and behavioral disorders. Every single time life poked at those raw, emotional bruises, food was right there, waiting with open arms like, "Come here, I got you." While this tragic backstory explains her profound pain, it unfortunately cannot excuse the reckless choices she makes as an adult. By the time Dolly transitions into young adulthood, her life is already in a terrifying tailspin. She attempts to join Job Corps and secure employment, but her failing body, ravaged by asthma, congestive heart failure, and constant oxygen dependency, consistently derails her efforts. Instead of cultivating personal independence, her existence keeps regressing back to severe overeating and highly volatile relationships. The ultimate blow lands when her father tragically dies by suicide, a crushing wave of grief that shatters her remaining stability. It is profoundly sad to watch how every major emotional trauma immediately triggers her eating compulsion, treating food as an emergency exit, completely blind to the fact that this exit locks her in another burning room. Then along comes Ricky, her husband, who is quite literally a walking catastrophe of red flags. Dolly connects with him online during a period when both are completely ungrounded, swiftly moving into his space and soon finding herself pregnant. Their daughter, Trinity, is brought into the world, but Dolly's health and the marital relationship instantly disintegrate. The episode reveals that Ricky was deeply cruel, manipulative, and abusive, with Stacy exposing a sinister detail. He would openly mock Dolly while intentionally feeding her heavy, fried meals just to watch her expand. Let's be real. That isn't love. That is straight-up villainous behavior, served with a side of toxic grease. The most heartbreaking casualty of this chaos is that Stacy ends up completely raising infant Trinity, holding legal custody since the baby was just a few days old. This critical factor fundamentally shifts the stakes of the entire episode, because Dolly is no longer just fighting to save her own life. She is loudly proclaiming a desire to reclaim her daughter. Consequently, the audience begins auditing her actions with extreme skepticism. Declaring a desire to get her life back for her child is one thing, but actually constructing the disciplined, stable environment required to raise a child is a completely different assignment. When Dolly finally embarks on the journey to Houston to seek help from Dr. Now, the road trip devolves into an absolute nightmare before they even clear the city limits. She is trapped in severe pain, gasping for breath, battling painful skin rashes, and demanding emergency bathroom stops every few miles as her body violently protests the travel. By the time she finally arrives at the clinic, she anxiously hopes the scale won't be too merciless. But reality strikes hard. 593 pounds. Standing at a mere 5 feet 2 inches, her body mass index is at a catastrophic level that Dr. Now immediately classifies as dangerous, sternly warning her that her vital organs are under immense, unsustainable strain. Dr. Now wastes zero time dismantling her excuses and cutting straight to the structural issues. Dolly immediately tries to scapegoat Ricky for her enabling environment, and while Ricky is undeniably toxic, Dr. Now shifts the focus entirely back to personal accountability, asking a pointed question: who is actively purchasing the cookies, brownies, and chips currently filling the pantry? Food doesn't just manifest inside a home, someone has to physically bring it through the door. This realization drags Stacy right into the line of fire, proving that despite her deep love and sacrifices, the entire home dynamic must be radically overhauled, or nothing else will change. The initial medical benchmark is straightforward: lose 60 pounds over the next 2 months. Dr. Now notes that given her extreme metabolic baseline, simply following the prescribed diet plan should make this goal highly achievable. However, the real obstacle isn't Dolly's intellectual understanding of a calorie deficit. It's her psychological readiness to grow up and shoulder real accountability. Dr. Now clearly anticipates the looming pattern. If her mother enforces a strict junk food-free structure, will Dolly submit to that discipline? Or will she flee to another situation that allows her to remain a perpetual child? Spoiler alert: that exact power struggle becomes the focal point of her entire journey. In the beginning, Dolly manages to show some superficial compliance, but her codependent living situation with Stacy turns toxic incredibly fast. Stacy naturally starts policing her intake, auditing her portions, and tracking her movements, causing Dolly to throw tantrums about being treated like an infant. To be completely fair, no grown woman wants her mother monitoring every single bite she takes. At the same time, however, Dolly is entirely rent-dependent, living under Stacy's roof, relying on her for survival, while Stacy is simultaneously raising Dolly's biological child. The "I'm an independent adult" defense completely falls apart when your entire adulthood is being outsourced to everyone else in the room. Seeking an escape from her mother's authority, Dolly begins sneaking away to a local park under the guise of exercising, but instead spends her time feeding ducks while brooding over how unfair it is that animals can eat freely without restriction. Honestly, that specific scene is deeply tragic yet inadvertently hilarious. Ma'am, those ducks are not enrolled in Dr. Now's rigorous medical program. The ducks aren't trying to medically qualify for a life-saving bariatric surgery. The ducks don't have a strict 60-pound weight loss mandate hanging over their heads while battling congestive heart failure. That bizarre moment perfectly illustrates Dolly's distorted worldview. To her, even basic life-saving accountability feels like an oppressive punishment. Predictably, her emotional instability drives her right back into volatile relationships with men. Following a massive blowout with her mother, Dolly packs her bags, flees to a homeless shelter, reconciles with her abusive husband Ricky, and moves back in with him, only to quickly remember his controlling nature and run away yet again. Next, she impulsively moves into a motel with Philip, a man she has known for a grand total of a few weeks, and suddenly the high are rushing into an engagement. Let's be real here. Getting engaged after a mere 6 weeks while living out of a cramped motel room on disability checks and food stamps is the absolute opposite of a stable lifestyle foundation. And honestly, Stacy's raw fury is entirely justified. She isn't being cruel. She is surviving. She is single-handedly raising Dolly's abandoned child, managing Dolly's endless operational chaos, and watching her adult daughter bounce from one self-inflicted disaster to another while expecting everyone to remain on standby to rescue her. Dr. Now backs the mother up, stating plainly that Dolly cannot continuously mistreat, abuse, and drain everyone in her orbit and still expect them to perpetually show up as her personal rescue squad. That is the hard boundary Dolly is completely unprepared to face. Emotional support is a two-way street. It is not an unlimited, lifetime cleanup service for your self-sabotage. At her high-stakes final medical appointment, Dolly shows up flanked by Stacy and Cheyenne, conspicuously leaving Philip behind because she knows her mother completely despises the relationship. She desperately hopes her minimal weight progress will buy her Dr. Now's approval, but the scale reveals she has only lost 40 pounds total over the entire year, failing miserably to meet the basic standards required for surgery. At that exact moment, Stacy finally snaps, and decades of repressed resentment, exhaustion, and fury come pouring out all at once. She announces that she drove 5 grueling hours specifically to deliver a boundary. She is officially refusing to take Dolly back into her home, utterly sick of sacrificing her own peace, while Dolly stubbornly refuses to treat her own life with an ounce of seriousness.